hundreds of you via Zoom and Facebook Live tonight. In recent weeks, our sacred community has been deeply troubled and saddened by the loss of innocent life, the flames of hatred and prejudice that we see spreading through our nation, and the violence we see in our cities. As a congregational family, we paused and reflected on what we have seen and felt, always mindful of God's sheltering presence and the deep wisdom of our faith that nourishes our spirits and guides our lives. Guided by Judaism's enduring values of respect, tolerance, justice, and righteousness, the synagogue's leadership, including the clergy and President Dr. Edward Mishner, planned a series of events designed to help our community confront hatred and prejudice. Tonight is the first program in this series. Judaism teaches us that a society is responsible, particularly responsible, for caring for its most vulnerable citizens. In that light, we invited Christian Picciolini to share his story with us. Mr. Picciolini has lived on both sides of the racial divide. Christian Picciolini is the award-winning television producer, public speaker, author, peace advocate, and a former violent extremist in the American white power skinhead movement. Today, Christian highlights his compassionate and empathetic disengagement practices through case studies of the Free Radicals Project, his nonprofit and extremist intervention initiative, as well as the tactics and parallels of the white power movement that he was once involved with to today's white nationalists. I know that tonight's program will be interesting, thought-provoking, and energizing for all of us. In these challenging times, hatred, racism, intolerance, and divisiveness are prevalent. Discussions and conversations such as what we are about to experience can heal, improve, and connect us with each other. The Rabbi Mark G. Loeb Center is able to bring you this event this evening free of charge, thanks to the generous contributions from supporters like you. Thank you. If tonight's event moves you, please consider making a gift so that we can continue to offer this important programming to our community free of charge. Tomorrow, you will receive an email with opportunities to donate. We thank you in advance for your generosity. Your gift makes a huge impact in our programming. And now, it's my great honor and privilege to introduce Rabbi Steve Schwartz, Senior Rabbi of Bethel Congregation. Thank you. Rabbi?
Yeah, I'll appreciate kind comments, words that you shared, and the lovely introduction. And really, at this point, I'm just a conduit, let folks know a little bit about what we'll be doing this evening. Christian is going to present to us, tell us about some of his story. Christian, I'm hoping you're going to touch a little bit on the new book that you have out. If not, we'll get to it later when we talk. After Christian's presentation, he and I will dialogue for a bit, and then we hope to have plenty of time towards the end of our program to open it up for questions. So without any further ado, Christian, thank you so much for being here and starting our year in this important way, something we hope to come back to over and over again and work together to make a better world. Christian Picciolini.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. First, I want to say it's a real pleasure and an honor to be invited to speak to you tonight. Thank you to the center for having me. But I also want to acknowledge that it's a huge privilege for me to be here as well, considering my past. And also considering the fact that there are so many people of color who don't get the same second chances that I've gotten. So hopefully I can help raise their voices a little bit. I'd like to tell you a little bit of my story. And I'd actually like to keep it a little bit shorter tonight because I want to leave enough room for a discussion afterwards and for questions afterwards, in case you have any. So thank you again for having me. I'm going to try and share a presentation now real quick. And please, Rabbi, let me know if it works. You should be seeing the first slide now. Good, okay. You know, my story didn't start 46 years ago when I was born necessarily. It started in 1996, really, was when I walked away from the American white supremacist movement that I had been a part of for 8 years already. I was 23 years old at the time when I walked away from what was America's first neo-Nazi skinhead group, which was founded in Chicago. But I had already spent 8 years from the time I was 14 years old as a member of this organization. But before that, I want to just take a step back to that time when I was 14 years old and give you a little bit of a snapshot of what that looked like. I wasn't raised to be a racist. In fact, my parents are Italian immigrants who immigrated to the United States in the mid-60s. And when they arrived, they were often the victims of prejudice. And I remember growing up that we were always surrounded by, you know, a broad and diverse mix of people. There were people from other countries that would visit my parents and different religions. So I always had access to that type of diversity and never really witnessed any type of outward racism at home. But because my parents are immigrants, it also meant that they had to work extremely hard. And I didn't see them 7 days a week, sometimes, you know, 14 or 16 hours a day when they were off running a small business. And they were satisfied I was surrounded by a lot of love, family, aunts and uncles and grandparents. So there weren't any real warning signs. I didn't really act out. I was, in fact, very shy growing up and, you know, loved to create art and things like that. So there really weren't very many warning signs that my parents could have seen. But around the time I turned 13 years old, right around the time I graduated from 8th grade, I had started to really battle with a sense of identity. I didn't know who I was. You know, I struggled being raised in an Italian, very Italian family on the southwest side of Chicago in an Italian neighborhood, but then having been uprooted and moved away to a more upper middle class neighborhood because that's where my parents wanted me to go to school. And even though I never really spent any time in that neighborhood, didn't really become friends with the people I went to school with, what that did was it also stopped me from really developing any meaningful relationships with the people in the neighborhood where my grandparents raised me. So I struggled for about a year, and at that point started to really show some warning signs of just being very isolated. And one day in 1987, I was standing in an alley in a back street, and I was smoking a joint, and a man came up to me and he pulled the joint from my mouth and he looked me in the eyes and he said, "That's what the communists and the Jews want you to do to keep you docile." If I'm being completely honest, I didn't know at 14 what a communist was. I didn't really know if I'd met a Jewish person before. I'd grown up, you know, going to a Catholic school, and it wasn't really part of the conversation. And I didn't really understand what the word docile meant or what the point he was trying to get to me was. But what I can say was it was the first time in my life that I felt as though somebody paid attention to me that wasn't a family member. He was older than me. He was about 26 years old. And what I didn't know about this man was that he was America's first neo-Nazi skinhead leader. And he was recruiting me at that time. Even though I didn't understand what he was saying, I paid attention and I listened. I tried to act cool and you know, kind of flippant. And he started to reel me in by offering me a sense of belonging. He knew that I was a vulnerable young man who didn't have any friends. He picked up very quickly that I was somebody who had been bullied growing up, and didn't have any kind of close interactions or any family to speak of. Even though I knew my family loved me, I didn't really have an intimate relationship with them because they were always gone. So he recognized something very important, and that was that I was looking for a sense of identity, community, and purpose. I wasn't searching for an ideology. I wasn't even all that idealistic at that point, but I was searching for a place to be seen. And in fact, after he reeled me in a short time after that, I did feel very empowered by what he had offered. I had gone from, this very invisible 14-year-old to somebody who now was not invisible. In fact, I was feared. I shaved my head and I put on the boots that I was given because I wanted to fit in. And suddenly I noticed that the people who had bullied me or didn't pay attention to me at all either now paid attention or were afraid of me. So it had this kind of effect of this false empowerment very, very quickly. And because of that, I became blind, at least at first, to what I had to do to buy that, to pay that price of admission, so to speak, to belong. And what that meant was that I had to adopt the language. Eventually, I started to believe the things that I had learned, although at first it was very, very foreign to me. I started to mimic their activities, and I started to participate in acts of violence that were happening. Very soon after I was recruited, around the time I was 16 years old, the man who recruited me, his name is Clark Martell, went to prison for a series of violent crimes. And that instance really kind of propelled me in the same direction, but in an amplified direction, because what happened at that time was that when this man went to prison, all of the other people that were surrounded by him also went to prison or had decided to run from the law enforcement folks. And because I was so young, I really hadn't been involved in the things that they were a part of, so I wasn't complicit in that. And I essentially was the last man standing when there was nobody left. So I took that opportunity, having already been in for 2 years and becoming very indoctrinated and learning how to recruit other people. I decided that I was going to use that opportunity to take control of this, at the time, very kind of infamous organization, which was America's first white power skinhead group. And I started to understand things about how young people interacted with each other, and that so much of what we were doing was social, and that one of the ways to increase recruitment was to use music as propaganda. And when I was 16 years old, I decided to start a band that would put our ideology to music. And in fact, was very effective with that, and was one of the earliest bands in America to use that modality as kind of a form of propaganda. I want to just take a step back real quick to the sense of identity, community, and purpose that I talked about earlier. And I think that one of the biggest misnomers in trying to understand why people gravitate to hate movements is that most people tend to think it's because of the ideology. Either they were raised that way, or they were seeking that ideology out, or they had some sort of an influence that led them in that direction to begin with. And I want to just kind of clarify that, having worked with hundreds of people in these movements to help them disengage, which is the work that I do now. And what I've realized is that people aren't necessarily searching for that ideology or even interested in participating in hate to further that. They're more so, at least initially, looking for a sense of identity, community, and purpose. And those are three things that we all search for. They're important to all of us. They define who we are, what our values are, and frankly, what our passions are. This whole idea of who am I? I didn't know at that age who I was, and frankly, not a lot of people do. But there were a lot of complications. I didn't know if I was Italian, growing up in an Italian family, in an Italian neighborhood in America, or if I was an Italian American, or if I was American. I didn't know if, I certainly didn't have any agency, and I didn't know how to find that. And when it was offered to me at a time when I was vulnerable, the reward that I got from belonging, from that sense of community that came with it, was really intoxicating for somebody who had never had that before. So I'm saying all of this because, we're dealing with an issue now where this is not a fringe problem anymore like it may have been when I was involved in the 80s and 90s. Although I would argue that, white supremacy has been really a foundation of a lot of what this country has been about from the very beginning. And although we've made progress, we've still not managed to really root out white supremacy. But the community aspect of it, where do I belong? It answered the question of what an idealistic person should be doing with their life. And at that age, from 14 to 16, which is kind of the magical age, is really when people are forming their sense of idealism. They're finding out who they are, where they belong, what their tribe is, so to speak, or who their group of friends is. It's as simple as that. And it's a very, very powerful thing that really shapes who we are. And extremists understand this, especially because they choose to focus on targeting people who are, from lack of a better word, vulnerable populations. Let me clarify that, because I don't want to give the impression that you have to be poor, you have to come from a broken home, you don't have an education. That those are not the people that are being recruited. While they are some, we are kind of struggling right now as a society for a sense of identity, community, and purpose. And with a disappearing middle class and so many changes happening in our world, there are a lot of people now who are researching for that, who are now very vulnerable to this sense of radicalization. And of course, purpose, that was defined for me. I didn't have really a purpose before that. I was young, I was trading baseball cards with myself in a closet before that, so I didn't really know where I wanted my life to go. But what they did was make it so that I was tasked with protecting something of great value. At least that's what they made it seem like, through tactics of fear and propaganda that made me feel as though something that was very important to me, which at that point was the only thing that I had, was this kind of community of white militants, that somebody wanted to take that away from me and made me so afraid that I had to defend it. And so then I was tasked with this thing of great importance that took me from, this lost 14-year-old to, the 17 and 18 and 19-year-olds who thought I was saving the world, according to what I believed in. But since we're all searching for identity, community, and purpose, and not all of us get radicalized, what is the actual cause that makes somebody adhere to, an ideology that wants to hurt other people or marginalize other people? And what I figured out is, through our life's journey, we hit what I call potholes in that journey. And potholes can be anything like trauma. It can be abuse. It can be poverty. It can be all of those things that one would think might cause somebody to gravitate towards a negative or a toxic lifestyle. But it can also be things like privilege that keeps us separate, from the rest of humanity. It can be things like grief or a sudden loss, where we're now trying to make sense of the situation and very willing to blame somebody else for that. Oftentimes, hatred for other people, something I've discovered, is also self-hatred that is being projected onto others, or uncertainty mostly. When we are uncertain, we're looking for answers. And today, there is an influx of information coming to us, attempting to inform us to blame somebody else. And there's a whole lot of that going on. The internet has really made it very, very difficult in that sense. I had to be in an alley when I was 14 years old. Somebody gave me a pamphlet, invited me to a meeting. Now it's just a matter of opening your computer, logging on to a social media platform, and having to really kind of navigate through misinformation and propaganda that is very, very similar, in fact, almost identical to the same type of things that influenced me 30 years ago or 35 years ago. Those potholes can detour us to the fringes where there are people waiting with these narratives. And these toxic narratives can be everything from white nationalism and extremism to drug culture or gangs or sex trafficking. They're waiting kind of, so to speak, on the fringes of these potholes for the stragglers who can't navigate them. And then they promise them paradise. They promise them that sense of identity, community, and purpose. And those three things are very powerful intoxicants. What changed me? First of all, I had doubts every day for those 8 years that I was involved, even though I was progressively getting more adamant about my views. The doubts never quieted. I just got better at stuffing them down so I didn't have to pay attention to them until something was right in front of me and I couldn't ignore it anymore about how I felt. So one of the things that happened that was a major catalyst for me was at 19 years old, I met a girl and fell in love, and we got married and we had our first child. And that really was the first thing that challenged my sense of identity, community, and purpose that I'd found in this movement. Because I really couldn't justify being a hate monger and a loving father. They didn't work in concert. So I struggled with that because I was empowered by this movement because it had been really all I'd known. And suddenly now I had seen this kind of glimmer of love for the first time in my life. So it really was very confusing. And I did embrace being a father and being, a husband, except I was never brave enough during that 8 years that I was involved to really walk away from the movement because I was so afraid of starting over and going back to kind of that invisible person I was. Another really big catalyst that happened was in 1994, I decided I was going to open a record store to sell the racist music that I was making and importing. And in this record store, I knew I couldn't apply for a business license to sell racist music. So I sold all sorts of music. I sold hip hop and I sold punk rock and heavy metal. And then I had a corner that was this racist music. Actually, you can see it right in the display case there, but to the right was all the other music. So you could come in and shop for anything. And what I wasn't expecting to do was sell any of that other music. I knew that 75% of my business was this racist music. But people did come in to buy that other music. People who were of color, who were gay, who were Jewish. And I couldn't ignore my interactions with them. They knew who I was. And yet they came in a non-aggressive way to challenge me under the guise of shopping. They knew everything that I was about, and they kept coming back. And every time they kept coming back, they would make it personal. They would, have small talk and conversation with me that was just about music. And I didn't recognize it at the time, but they knew exactly what they were doing. And then one day I can tell you that I had an incident with a young Black teenager that had been coming into the store, since it had opened, and he never would really buy anything, but he was very kind of goofy all the time and always happy. And one day he came in about 6 months after I had opened, and I noticed he wasn't, very happy. And I asked him what was wrong. I don't even know why I had asked him that, but something compelled me to ask him what was going on. And he had told me that his mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer that day. And suddenly I found myself talking to this young Black teenager about his mother having cancer and my mother who had been diagnosed with breast cancer just 6 months before that. And I wasn't thinking about who I was talking to. I was just having a conversation, a meaningful interaction with somebody that now I cared about. And it was moments like that that happened to me all the time that really kind of eventually forced me to walk away. But I hate to say it, it wasn't in a very, very brave way. I decided that I couldn't sell the music anymore, the racist music, in front of these new friends that I was making. So I pulled it, and the store had to close because I couldn't support it without the racist music, unfortunately. And I walked away without really saying anything, without denouncing it, trying to give myself enough space to figure things out without telling the people that I was associated with that I was leaving. And that lasted about a year until I decided I needed to just break away. I moved, tried to make new friends. I tried to find a new job, and nothing was really working, even though I was treating people with respect, newfound respect that, that I had. I wasn't really doing well myself because I'd never really told anybody about who I was. I was trying to outrun that part of my life. And it wasn't until I had an honest conversation about who I used to be that I realized that it was something that I couldn't keep to myself, that there were too many people that had been hurt by it, that I had to hold myself accountable for that. And I essentially canceled myself in 1999. Nobody was kind of after me. This was before the internet, so there wasn't, any kind of real record of what I'd done. And I decided that was just not the person I wanted to live my life in the shadow of. So I decided at that point to be brave enough to denounce what I was a part of, to speak out against what I had done, and in turn at that same time decided I wanted to help people disengage from what I was a part of. So for the last 20 years, since around 2000, I have been helping people disengage from essentially the same types of movement that I was a part of. And the way I do that is not in an aggressive manner, but essentially the same way that it happened to me is I do a lot of listening, and I listen for potholes, and then I try and repair them. I work with a lot of professionals, everything from psychologists and therapists to job coaches or job trainers and life coaches and educators, to really try and repair the motivators of why people were detoured in the first place. I rarely address directly the ideology. I don't debate people. I don't even tell them that they're wrong, even though I absolutely know that they are. They come to that conclusion themselves after doing the work of repairing their potholes, reflecting, but then also, when they're ready, when I think that they're at the point where they're open enough to it, I would start introducing them the same way it happened to me to the people that they think that they hate. And every time I've done this, and I've done this hundreds of times, people walk out of there absolutely changed and completely ashamed of how ignorant they were going in. Now, it takes time, but it is the compassion that they receive. And of course, it is never the responsibility of the person who is the potential victim to do this. But I can tell you, I also have an endless list of people who come to me who are African-American or Jewish or gay, who say, I want to be that person who sits with that hater because I want them to understand the truth about people like me. And every time I've done this, I can tell you it is the most amazing experience to be able to sit with somebody who was, at one time so full of hate, break down and be so ashamed of what they've been a part of, and then start the process of working to repair the damage that they've caused. It really is a very spectacular thing to witness. And honestly, that compassion and then that commitment to tikkun olam, repairing the world, repairing the damage that they've caused, is really the most powerful thing that I've ever seen. I do this work through an organization called the Free Radicals Project, which is essentially a global network of people who are committed to helping people disengage in this way. And with that process, I've been able to help over 300 people disengage from hate. I want to end it there, I think, because I think I went a little bit longer than I'd hoped, and I want to be able to have some great questions and some dialogue and really kind of go in any direction that you would like. Certainly there's a lot to talk about, but I'll just hand it back over to you. Thank you. Al?
I'm back, Christian. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great.
Had to work out the unmuting thing there. Took
We're all learning, right?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. I just want to thank you for your honesty and for the profound humanity that you've shown over these last years in working through what you've done and who you've been, and in becoming who you are today, and in helping others in that journey as well. I had a couple of questions, a number of questions. I'm not going to go too long because I do want to get to other folks as well. So we had talked for a few minutes before we went live, and I'd asked you, had you ever worked with a shul before? And you looked at me like, are you crazy? Of course I work with shuls. But I just want to tell you that tikkun olam rolled off your lips so smoothly and so nicely. And it's such a core Jewish value, and you are living it in your life. It's incredible. You are absolutely living it in your life.
I'm trying, and it's, it's not anything that has an expiration date for me. I knew when I started that this was something I wanted to commit the rest of my life to. I also knew that I wanted to be the person that I wished would have come to me in that alley other than that skinhead. Because I can tell you had a soccer coach, or, a band, or, a group of jugglers. And I often say, like, a group of ballerinas, had they been there and come up to me, I could have been the greatest ballet dancer on earth. Terrible dancer, unfortunately. But, and I really hope to be that person that's there for that, that, because I can tell you, Rabbi, there is not one person that I met when I was in that movement that didn't have doubts, that may not have voiced it. It may not have been like the kind of safe place where you could have been vulnerable among those people, but you just knew, because as a recruiter, you were taught to key in on that vulnerability. And as a recruiter, you learn to continue to keep an eye on that throughout the way. So I know that there were people who have doubts. And I think that if we can find some way to give them a place where they have a safe place to work through this, but still hold them accountable for this, we're going to have a lot more success than if we say, you know what, they've done something that we can never forgive. And in certain cases, people may have done things. And I struggle with that too, because I do work with some people who, I have to ask myself, can I do this with them? Have they gone too far? And then I have to ask myself also, what if somebody would have thought that about me when I was, 16 or 17 years old? Because I'm sure a lot of people did, rightfully so. So I feel like I have this special mission to where somehow they see what I've done and they believe they can do it too. And I have that responsibility to at least let them start that process while holding them accountable as they do it.
One of the things that's powerful to me about your story is that this is not something, your change of heart, so to speak. It was not an instantaneous thing. It wasn't like you went to bed one night and woke up that morning and then everything was different. It's something that happened gradually over time. But there were these moments that truly touched your soul. And you spoke about the young black man coming into your record shop. And I wonder if you've ever been able to communicate with him and to let him know the kind of impact he's had on your life.
No, I wish I think about that all the time. I wish I knew who he was. I mean, he was just kind of this anonymous teenager who came in, and the store wasn't open that long. I think it was only open maybe a little bit more than a year. So it never really developed, that kind of a relationship with people. People touched me and they changed my life, but I didn't even, in some cases know their names. It was, partly because I was also in an environment where it was hard to be friendly to people, because there were always people around me that, of course, that wouldn't have been good. So I had to keep a distance while also letting it touch me. Like I had to, like, it was a very internalized, it was like surgery happening while I was still up and walking around, but somebody was working on me all the time. And it was those moments. And the more they happened, the more I became open to them happening. And the more I found myself when I was away from those groups, like if I was at work, it was safer to be open about those things. So I started to do that over time, but it wasn't a safe place to do that. Not so much because it was, they could have been violent or anything like that. It was more of an ego thing for me, to be honest. I thought that was such an important part of my life, because that's all I'd really known, that I was so scared to lose that, faux respect, that, that fake empowerment that I thought I had. So I really wasn't very brave at that time.
It also shows you that you never know when you have an interaction with someone what kind of impact that will have on them. And in the same way, you never know what kind of impact someone else is having on you. Sometimes you uncover it later on. I wonder if you'd just say a few words to folks about, I've heard you speak before, and there's a very powerful story that I heard you tell about when you went back into the sort of more normal work environment and you went back to your old high school. Could you just...
That was another one. That was probably the most powerful moment, and the one that kind of rustled the courage for me to speak more about this. So I talked about those several years where I kind of wandered after I abandoned the movement, but really hadn't done any work. I was, scared and running. So in 1999, I had made a kind of a new group of friends, and one of the girls I had made friends with had started a job in IT. And I didn't even own a computer. I didn't know anything about computers at the time. But she said, listen, I just started this new job. They're looking for people. It's super, entry level. You don't really have to know very much. It's just setting up computers at, corporations and universities when they order 400 or 500 at a time, and you have to go there and connect them all. So I was in a really bad place at that time. I certainly didn't believe what I believed. I certainly was, trying to live a better life, but I just had never really confronted, what I had done. And I went in for the job interview completely expecting to never, make it past that first interview. And it turned out that I got the job, and it turned out that the company was IBM. And I had been kicked out of 6 high schools. I had, barely had a high school diploma. I hadn't gone to college at that time yet. And I didn't even own a computer. It was kind of like the most ridiculous thing. But they gave me the job. It gave me some hope, because I thought, okay, well, now I have some purpose. I was still a good father. My wife had left me by that point, and my life had kind of fallen apart. But I was, still very focused on being a good father and trying to make good. And then all of a sudden they told me where I'd be going for my first day of work, and I wasn't so thrilled anymore. It turned out that, and they had no idea about my past. It turned out that they put me to work at my old high school, the same one I'd been kicked out of twice, to install their computers for the summer. So I was going to be there for the whole summer. And I suddenly was terrified, because I knew that the minute I showed my face, even though it had been 8 years since I'd been to high school there, and several years since I'd left the movement, somebody was still going to recognize me. I'd caused quite a commotion at that school. Everything from sit-ins for a white student union to fights in the hallway. It was not pretty. And I decided I was going to go to work and deal with it as it came. And in the first 15 minutes I got there, the black man who was the head of security when I was at high school there walked right past me. And this was a man whose life I had made hell while I'd been there. And when he walked by me, he didn't recognize me, but I kind of froze. I didn't know what to do. I knew I had to do something. And I kind of saw, my life flash before my eyes again, and I was going to lose everything again. So I decided I was going to follow him to the parking lot and talk to him. I didn't know what I was going to say to him, but when I got, reached him as he was getting into his car, I said, "I'm sorry." And he looked at me and he kind of took a step back, because he recognized who I was. And then he approached me again, and he extended his hand and he shook it, and he said, "I accept your apology. And I'm sure it makes you feel really good, but it doesn't do a whole lot for me. I'm going to need you to do something." And of course it was a longer conversation, and he forgave me, and we cried and hugged and all, just had this moment where he really challenged me, and he said, "You got to fix this. You've got to fix the damage you've caused. And you also have to fix what's broken inside of you, because you're still dealing with this." And I think what he recognized in me too at that point was that I wasn't, this hater that I at first I was this kid who was really seduced by this sense of belonging. And he gave me a chance. This was a guy who could have turned his back on me, should have turned his back on me for what I'd done to him. And he didn't. He chose compassion, and he saved my life, because if it wasn't for him, I don't know that I would have ever found the courage to confront what I had done. He pulled that out of me. He said, "It's your responsibility to do that." And I promised him I would, and I did, and I haven't stopped since. It's been 21 years.
It's such a powerful story for us to hear. Those of us who pitch our sense in the Jewish community. We're getting into this period of time where we're kind of leading ourselves up to the celebration of the New Year in the fall, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And these are days of intense self-reflection, but also days where we're asked to think about the depths of our relationship with others, and forgiveness becomes a central issue. And it's so powerful to hear, I mean, because that, what you just related to us, it's about forgiveness, but also your own self-reflection, and also the demand action. Just to cogitate is not enough. You have to go out and do something about it. Yeah, which you have
absolutely. You just reminded me, I mean, one of the things he made me promise is that I would find a way to forgive myself. But he knew I needed to do the work, but that I needed to get to that point to make it back. He knew that I couldn't make it back without that. So it was because of him that I was able to do that.
Now, have you maintained a relationship with him over the years?
I have. Yeah, he just retired last year. He's doing well. I just checked in with him about 2 weeks ago. We used to go fishing, but that's been put on hold, I think, with everything else.
If this was one of those old TV shows, I'd say, and actually here he is right here. We bring
Well, we've done that already on 60 Minutes, so you can probably go back and watch that. Yeah, we did. A few years ago, it was an amazing experience for me to really sit down with him again after many years of kind of, you know, living the mentorship that he had taught me, but not staying very connected with him. It was great.
Christian, I just have a couple of more, I think, relatively quick ones for you, and then we have some questions that are piling up in the chat room I want to get to as well. Sure. So at a certain point when you were talking, you said that, you know, this is as you're kind of going through this process of disengaging from the white supremacist movement, and you said that you had an honest conversation. I was wondering, was that an honest conversation with another person, or was it an internal conversation?
Well, I think at first I had to have, I think I had to have an internal conversation with myself first that was honest, because I think I had to really explore what had led me there. It wasn't the ideology. That wasn't something I even knew about before it landed on my lap. So I had to really understand how I felt isolated, how I felt abandoned, how I, you know, had all those things, but also how then I decided to callously use that self-hatred on other people, almost as, you know, projecting it, because I didn't want to deal with it. So the fact that I could hurt other people then made me feel, and that might be hard to, you know, to understand, but so many of the people that I was, you know, with at that time had never felt anything other than when they could elicit a response from somebody else. You know, if they could hurt somebody else, they could feel. If they could, you know, belittle somebody else, it kind of maybe brought them back to how they had felt belittled by their fight. You know, it was this really weird dynamic of kind of reintroducing trauma onto somebody else that they had experienced in some way too. And these, of course, weren't people who had ever kind of thought through it or, you know, self-reflected enough to understand what they were doing. And I think, you know, they certainly understood that they were hurting other people, but I'm still to this day not sure that they really understood why.
Right. I guess that's part of what you help people unpack in your own work. And then just my last question, and we're going to go to the questions that folks have been typing in. I'm just curious, is faith something that has played a role in this process for you? Is there, you know, is faith important in this process to you?
You know, I was raised a Catholic. I kind of, when I left, I disengaged, I really kind of cut all my ties to anything dogmatic whatsoever, because I really was kind of suffering from like almost a trauma from that. And right now I would probably consider myself an agnostic. I don't think I'm smart enough to know, but you know, I do think that there's something. But here's the way that I would kind of describe my faith: is I almost see us all as individuals as the cell in God's body, right? We're all cells in God's body, and if we can't communicate with each other, if we're having problems, those cells die, they get sick. And right now the body of God, whichever, you know, God you put faith into, is sick with this. And we need to learn how to heal that. that part. Otherwise, we will die. And I think that if we can have faith in an idea, in a greater power, we need to learn to have faith in each other to some degree too. And we need to learn to build that trust and that faith in each other, because right now I think we're at really an all-time low for that. So, I am a spiritual person. Just haven't figured out exactly where to put that yet.
No, it's a lovely answer, and thank you for your honesty. But I think after that answer, you can certainly put theologian on your resume as well, because it was so beautifully said.
Oh, thank you very much.
We're going to go just to some questions from the folks who have joined us for the program tonight. And someone asked about the folks that you work with. Did they seek you out? Do you seek them out? How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it is the amount of people reaching out to me for help, unfortunately, is so overwhelming that I've never had the bandwidth to go out and proactively find people. That's not to say I haven't developed programs that are counter narratives that go out and search for people to send them back to us. I just don't have the bandwidth. So I can tell you that I've helped 300 people disengage, but it's such a long process that there are literally thousands of people that I'm working with for long periods of time that are at different stages of their disengagement. So no, I don't look for them. They find me, and they find me when I do, interviews, or they see my TED Talk, or they, come across my book. Somebody will, a parent will reach out, or they'll reach out directly.
Do you have anyone that helps you in your work? Do you have a staff, or how support in that way?
I have a volunteer staff all over the world. Unfortunately, because the work is so overwhelming, I've never managed to be able to stop long enough to properly build operationally the organization. But I have professionals that advise. I have volunteers that are like me, former extremists in other countries that are the initial kind of intake or triage that work with professionals in their regions. And as part of the Free Radicals Project, while I may be the only official volunteer for Free Radicals Project, because we don't have any paid employees, and I certainly don't charge for my work, we have a very robust global network of professionals and volunteers that's always growing. The goal is to formalize that, to build out the organization more, because what I do is not scalable in this way. Working one-on-one with people, it's become too overwhelming. So I've put in place some plans to grow that as we hit certain milestones. So right now we're okay, but see a point where it will have to grow.
When you say you work with people over an extended period of time, we're talking about years.
Years. Yeah, years.
Okay.
It really depends on the person and their situation, but I would say for kind of the median person I'm working with is anywhere from 1 to 3 years, sometimes longer. There are some people that I'm going on 7 or 8 years, and while they're really, really in a good place, they still need that sense of identity, community, and purpose. Because the trick is not, if you remove somebody from a sense of identity, community, and purpose, you have to replace that. Otherwise, they'll go sideways into something else. So, it's easier in metropolitan areas. Sometimes finding people help in more rural areas is difficult, because a lot of the work that I'm trying to find is also pro bono help, if people can't afford it. So it really depends on the situation. But I would say, yes, it's a long process. Nobody changes overnight, nor should they, because I think that I've seen in some cases people think that they can do it on their own. They were, one day a neo-Nazi leader, and the next day they want to help people disengage. And what that does is it sabotages them because they haven't done the work on themselves yet.
Right. Another question that's come up, just a sense of concern really for your own well-being. And someone wants to know, do you feel ever that you're in danger because of the work that you do?
No more so in danger than any vulnerable population, including some of the people that I'm speaking to tonight. This is unfortunately the reality that we live in. There are people who want to do harm to others. I think about it a lot. I have a family, I have, a wife and grown children, and I worry about that. The danger exists. Of course, you're dealing with sometimes dangerous people, but I think that the greater danger would be not doing anything about it. So I take precautions. I'm certainly very careful, but I also know that this is something that I have to do, that I want to do. Because if I didn't do it, there would be so many more people who wouldn't have an outlet and might choose to do something really negative with it.
Just kind of shift tone a little bit. And I was wondering about your education, because I know that, you went back to school, and just say a few words about that and what academic disciplines sort of drew you in?
Yeah, so because of that job at IBM, I was able a couple of years later to go back to school with their help. I ended up going to DePaul University and getting my bachelor's degree from there. And at that time, I chose international relations and international business. Although that's not necessarily what I focus on now, it's a large part of what I do, because I do, work internationally and with all different types of people. Had I thought ahead, I probably would have gone into psychology, which is something I may still do. I mean, I've got a lot of kind of outside experience doing that, but I'd love to formalize that. Yeah, I mean, ended up going there and funny enough, graduated with a 3.98 GPA and at the top of my class, and was really proud of that. Was really proud of that milestone, because I kind of had felt at one point in my life I wouldn't even be alive to be able to do something like that. So.
You're talking to a Jewish crowd. We're all proud of you now too. I want you to know that.
It's not that different than my Italian family. I got to be honest with you.
You're absolutely
not a whole lot of differences.
No question about that. A question has come in about how we can find opportunities to tell our stories to someone who might be feeling pulled by the white supremacy. And it actually brings to my mind your story about, I think it was Buffalo, and the young man and bringing him to the mosque.
Yeah, I'm happy to tell that story really quickly. That was a really fascinating and powerful story. So a young man, after reading my first book, which is my memoir, White American Youth, he had some problems with it. This was a guy who was a white supremacist. He had been discharged from the military for an injury that he got during basic training. Before that, he had been addicted to drugs, and his father had been an alcoholic who abused him and his mother. I mean, he had, talk about potholes, he had stepped in just about every single one before he even found white supremacy. Gone to the military, came back, was upset that he couldn't go after 9/11 with his brothers and sisters who were going off to fight that war. Came back very, very racist, very Islamophobic, and somebody had, I don't know how he got a copy of my book, but he read it, was really angry because obviously I left the movement at the end of that book, and he wanted to confront me about it. And I think, knowing what I know now, a lot of times people will be aggressive towards me because they want me to listen to them. They want some sort of interaction with me. They just don't know how to do that. So they'll attack me, they'll call me a name, they'll threaten me, and then I respond in a certain way that takes them off guard, and suddenly they're in a conversation with me and they don't even know it. But this man, I talked to him for a couple of months, and one day he had said, I saw a Muslim man praying in the park and I wanted to kick him in the face. And I knew that I had to meet him in person at that point and really sit down and talk to him, because I was afraid he was going to go over the edge. So I flew to Buffalo the next day and I met with him. And one of the first questions I asked him, when I sat with him, was, have you ever even met a Muslim person before, in person, TV, news, all that other stuff? Have you ever sat with one? And he said, no, I don't want to do that. I hate them. They hate me. I don't want anything to do with that. And of course, I had already kind of planned a meeting where I was going to bring him to the mosque to introduce him to the imam. And I, called the imam and I said, hey, we're coming over. I didn't tell the young man that I was working with where we were going. I said we were going to lunch. And then halfway there, I said, well, we're going to stop at the mosque first. And suddenly he got really anxious and panic attack, and was turned pale, probably paler than he wanted to be at that point. And we went to the mosque, and we met with the imam, and he was afraid. this guy was afraid of walking into the mosque, and the imam managed to disarm him, not even knowing what he was doing, but he started talking about films and movies and how he loved Chuck Norris. And it turned out that the guy I was working with was a huge Chuck Norris fan. And before they knew it, they were like quoting Chuck Norris lines from movies and like laughing about things. And they didn't even know. It was like that instance in the record store where I was talking to the black teenager about his mother having cancer in mind. It's like suddenly we were enraptured with each other's humanity and nothing else. And the same thing happened there. And I'm happy to say they're now very good friends. They go eat falafel on a regular basis. They hang out all the time. Their families are close. And all it took was that removal of fear. He was so afraid of what he didn't understand. And he was so upset at his life, and now had found an enemy because of what happened on 9/11 to place all that pain onto, that he had forgotten about everything else. And meeting that person really was so powerful that he took it upon himself to become friends with this person after that, and continue that relationship. And it's still going on today, years and years later.
So that's that key that unlocks that sense of the other person's humanity. Who knew the key could be Chuck Norris, right?
Yeah. I've said it before, but hatred is born of ignorance. Fear is its father, and isolation is its mother. You put those two things together, and it's a really dangerous combination: isolation and fear.
So we are, believe it or not, getting close to the witching hour here, and I believe Dr. Bohr has just a couple of closing comments. But Christian, I wanted to just thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you this evening, for coming to our community and sharing with us your story and your wisdom and your humor, and your grace and your humanity, because I think we're all moved, and it's a wonderful way for us to begin to look towards a new year. And God willing, should be a year that's better, more peaceful for everyone. Thank you so much. Dr.
My
Bohr.
pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yes, I also want to thank you very much. And I hope that our teenagers, we have a joint program with another synagogue, will have the opportunity to listen to you, and we'll arrange it for a later time. However, I also want to thank Rabbi Schwartz for moderating this fabulous conversation. And on a small different topic, I would like to invite all of you who are here with us tonight to join us next Wednesday, a week from this coming Wednesday, the 5th of August, for a first Wednesday program where we invite Dr. Yulia Lipmanovich from Chicago to perform a recital on the new piano that we just received today. So we have another guest from Chicago. Kristen, you're one, and Yulia is going to be the second one. I wish you good evening, and thank you very much for everyone who joined us tonight. Shalom.
Thank you very much. Shalom.
Christian, be well, be safe, be good.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. And if I could say anything to anybody listening, is we all have to do our part. We cannot just be bystanders in this. We all have a role to play. We can all affect the people closest to us. And we must.
And I think we can all say amen to that.
Amen.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
You too. Take care.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.